Thank you. It's a very good question. When now President Obama was running for office, he had a platform, and the disability community was actively involved in the campaign. And one of the issues that was raised from the community was that the United States become more involved with the convention, and also that we create a position, this position, to be able to enable us to really make advances on including disability in a meaningful way in our foreign policy.
He says, good morning, thank you for your introduction. And during your introduction, you said that there used to be problems in the past in the United States in terms of education and transportation and other issues that people with disability in the United States face. And you said that in spite of all the progress that was achieved, they still face other issues. So he wants to know what are the problems that disabled people in the United States face.
The United States, I think, like Algeria and other countries, have historically not seen disabled people as being able to be equal contributory members of the community. We've been looked at much more as from a medical perspective, as being sick and government needing to take care of us because we were not able to take care of ourselves. So in the case of the United States, you know, you're looking at having to undo hundreds of years of people thinking that disabled people wouldn't benefit from education, we wouldn't use accessible public transportation, we wouldn't be able to be employed, just as 3 examples. So for example, in the area of education, our law came into effect in 1973 and 1975. At that time, there were 1 million disabled children recorded as not attending school at all, and many other children who might have been in school but were not getting an appropriate education. The way I describe this is once the government committed itself to making changes, we had to learn the best way to do that. So for example, working with children who have reading difficulties, working with children who have physical disabilities and may need accommodations in the classroom, those are all things that we had to study and learn how to do. You know, unfortunately, there's not a magic wand that you can just sprinkle fairy dust over the universities and the community and we know exactly what to do right away. That's not the way it is. I mean, changing people's attitudes, I think, is very important so that the community believes that this is the right direction to go. That's part of the direction that we have to be moving in. But additionally, for example, with transportation, learning how to make buses accessible, learning how to make the trains accessible, learning the best way to put ramps on streets. Those are all things that we have learned a lot more about, but quite frankly, there are very many funny stories that I can reflect on now 30 years ago about what people's attitudes were about accessible buses, for example. People would say, why would we ever make a bus accessible? We never see you on the bus. Well, of course, I couldn't be on the bus because it wasn't accessible. But that was really the mentality. People didn't think that someone with a physical disability could go across the street, could get on a bus, would get on a bus. Now, you know, what we've seen is our transportation system has become pretty accessible. And you see many more disabled people out in the community as a result of that. The construction of buildings, new buildings being accessible, and buildings that had major renovations going on at that point were not accessible. So the development of standards, working with architects and working with governments to develop those standards and then to ensure that those standards were appropriately being complied with, and for the government to make sure that it was appropriately monitoring construction. That has taken a long period of time to really become part of the fabric of our country. You know, so simple things like if we didn't have the ramps that I've used over the last couple of days, I wouldn't have been able to get into most of the meetings that I went to, because there was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 steps. And basic things like bathrooms. You know, you go to the movies, you expect to have a bathroom you can use. You go to a government building or another building. Sometimes I think if the bathrooms aren't accessible, we should get rid of all the bathrooms, because the only way people will understand why it's important to have an accessible bathroom is if other people can't use it. And many of these things are easy to do, but it does mean that the society has to really see this as something important to happen. I believe we'll be working on that over the course of the next number of months, to have further discussions with the government to find out exactly what it's wanting. But we will, for example, begin to provide some basic information on things like issues in statistics, and we'll share information on standards that we have in the area of accessibility, and we'll be working with the embassy to follow up to see the best way that we can develop a good cooperative relationship.
Mrs. Hamadi from Liberté Daily newspaper, she wants to know more details about future cooperation projects.
And I think it's important to note that by the United States creating this position